Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Cybersecurity Meg, and as always, I'm super stoked that you're here. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about some of my pro tips on how I passed the CCSP exam. If you're not familiar with that acronym, it stands for the Certified Cloud Security Professional Exam. It's an exam given by ISC Squared. Now, to give you some background, because I know everyone's going to ask, here are some of the most commonly asked questions that I get. Do I have my CISSP? I do have my CISSP. I earned that in September of 2020, so a little over 1 year ago. B, what kind of background do I have in cloud? My background in cloud, I'll be honest, I've worked in cybersecurity for about 4 or so years now. And ever since I've worked in cybersecurity, I've had my hands physically, well, not physically because it's cloud, but I've had my hands within a cloud GUI to some extent, generally Azure or AWS. I never worked with the policies around it though. It was always hands-on doing technical aspects of it, setting and configuring NSGs, that kind of ordeal. So I had about 4 years of working with that. And I know you're also likely to ask, what is my education in cybersecurity? I have a bachelor's degree in political science, completely useless for the certification. My master's degree is in cybersecurity, completely useless for the certification. You're probably also going to want to know, how long did I study for the certification? And I'm here to tell you that even though you want to know that answer, it's completely useless to you. How long I studied for something is going to be completely different than how long you need to study for something. I'll tell you how long I studied. It was about 2 weeks of intense study, but that should have no bearing on how long you study. I feel that yes, you should take the CISSP before you take the CCSP. That's another insanely popular question people ask. The CISSP set me up for success in taking the CCSP. It provided me with a very strong foundation. It taught me how to kind of engage with the questions on the exam. I went into the CCSP exam knowing what kind of questions to expect, what kind of language to expect, the wording, the syntax, etc. So I 100% recommend taking the CISSP before you take the CCSP. The next question I always get asked is, how difficult is the CCSP compared to the CISSP? And again, this is a completely personal opinion, but in my completely personal opinion, I found the CCSP to be about twice as difficult as the CISSP. And you're probably thinking, well, that's kind of surprising, Meg, because the CISSP has so much more material to it. It's a monstrous exam. So why would the cloud exam be more difficult? And I have a few reasons for that. One, I didn't study nearly as long, so right off the bat, that's going to affect it. But I'll be completely honest with you, I don't even know that I could have really studied more for the CCSP. I felt like it was questions that I didn't really read in the book. It was more like intrinsic knowledge or logical processing answers, things that, they're not direct, straightforward questions. You're not going to get a question that says, what is layer 7 of the OSI model? That just doesn't exist here in IST squared exams. So I felt like the questions were a lot more holistic. They brought a bunch of the domains together and included several domains per question very often. Another difference that I found between the CCSP and the CISSP was that the CCSP, I felt like I could very rarely narrow down the best answer. Oftentimes when I was answering a question, I was only able to right off the bat get rid of one answer and kind of throw it to the side. In the CISP, I felt like it was very often that I could narrow the best answer down to, two, if not one. But in the CCSP, there were so many good answers for each question that I felt like they were all reasonable answers. And I really had to sit there and remind myself. I wrote down on my little whiteboard piece of paper that they give you, choose the best answer out of them. So that was something I had to be really mindful of and that I found to be more difficult compared to the CISSP. So you're also going to want to know what resources I used. The resources I used, and I'll be honest, you really have to understand what kind of learner you are when it comes to studying. I don't study well whatsoever when it comes to videos or audio. It just does not work with me. I learn via reading and through talking with other people. So the first thing I would recommend is you identify what your best learning method is. That said, the resources I use, the all-in-one CCSP book. I did do all of the practice questions within here, and I'd also recommend keeping score of your practice questions. So if you're doing domain 1 and you see that you get a 60% on the practice exam, but you're getting a 90% on domain 2 practice exam, then you're going to know right off the bat that you need to spend more time and effort relearning and re-going over domain 1 than domain 2. I also highly recommend highlighting. I highlight this about all of my cybersecurity books. I highlight things that I think are likely to have questions asked on, concepts that I struggle with and need to review, concepts that are new to me, things that I feel are important, I need more clarification on. So I use the all-in-one book. I read it from front to back. Then I also used this is, I believe, the Cybex, a Wiley brand official study guidebook. Again, I read this front to back and I answered all of the practice questions. If you want to know the difference between the two books, I honestly think they're completely different books. Like, there's definitely content within the all-in-one book that's not in the Cybex book, and there's definitely content in the Cybex book that's not in the all-in-one book. So I really felt like it was necessary for me to read both of them. If you're wondering, they're both about 300 pages each of readable material. So it's roughly 600 pages or less of readable material. I would not try to just read one of them and utilize that as a sole resource. That's something I'll talk about later as a pro tip, but I would definitely diversify your resources. So I did the same thing with the Cybex book. I read it front to back. I answered all of the practice questions. And again, I was always keeping note of how I was scoring per domain percentage-wise, so that I knew where my weak domains were. The last book that I used was the Cybex official practice test book. This has several hundred, if not a couple thousand practice questions in it. It has a couple full-length practice exams. One of the big pro tips that I can give you is that when you're at a point where you feel comfortable with the content, you should really be sitting down, emulating your exam environment. For me, I'm in North Carolina. I still had to wear a mask during the entire exam. So what I did to practice that ahead of time was to wear my mask, try to emulate the environment, let everyone know around me, please be quiet, I'm taking a practice exam, and really try to set myself in an environment that was akin to what I would be taking the test in. And I timed myself. I wanted to know exactly how long I was spending per question. So practicing the environment you're going to be in on test exam day, that's something that I find to be extremely helpful. I'd say I did like 80% of the questions in here. The real value for me in this book were the explanations. The explanations in the back of the book, they're quite lengthy. They tell you why the correct answer is correct and why the wrong answers are wrong. So I would genuinely invest in this book if you're about to take the exam, because I found it to be very helpful. So those are the book resources that I used. I'm also a huge fan of taking flashcards, writing flashcards. I think I probably made about 200 flashcards for this exam for things from basic definitions of concepts and terms I wasn't familiar of, all the way down to the levels of the SDLC, software development lifecycle for the cloud. Anything that I found I had a weakness area in, or I needed to review, or I needed to do rote memorization of, I make flashcards for. It personally helps me. It may not help you. Again, you need to identify your learning style and be able to kind of employ that when you're studying. If you see me looking down, it's because I have my phone. And as always, I take notes about what to speak about on my phone. So that's why. Here are some of the biggest pro tips I can give you on passing the CCSP exam. Number one, set a date for your exam and book it. Having the exam booked makes everything 10 times more real. When you have a date that you know you need to be ready to go for, that for me personally allows me to stop procrastinating. Because if I don't set that exam date, then it's a big in my imagination. I haven't paid for it. It's not set in stone. I don't have any, accountability to when I have to take it. So I don't feel as highly responsible for studying for it. So step one, book the dang exam. You'll be thankful. Just get it out of the way. That way you'll be able to make a plan on tackling it and passing it. The second thing I want to say is, once you book your exam and you know how many days or months you have until your exam, you should really create a study plan on what you want to cover day by day or week by week, whichever chunk of time you want to measure it in. in order to accomplish covering all of the material that you need to before the exam date. Whether you're only able to get through one chapter a week, which would take you quite a bit of time to get through all of them, I'll be honest, or you can do one chapter a day. What I would recommend is either typing or writing out, what information do I need to be covering per day? What is my study plan? What do I need to cover by 2 weeks out from my exam, 1 week out from my exam? How can I measure my success and my progress throughout my studying time? If you don't have quantifiable like measurements of how you're performing, whether that's from discerning how many chapters you've read or how many chapters you have to go or what you're scoring on your practice exams 2 weeks out from the exam compared to 6 weeks out from the exam. You need to be able to measure your progress and see that you're progressing and you're improving on learning the material. So that's the next thing that I would recommend. Make a plan, one that works for you, and stick to it. One thing that was really hard for me throughout this exam, I originally was supposed to take this exam in August. I didn't end up taking it until November. I had some personal things in life come up and I had to postpone the exam. I think it was until September when it was originally scheduled for August. And I felt, I don't want to say shame, but I felt really bad for having to do that. First off, it stinks. You have to pay $50 to Pearson View. So keep that in mind. Every time you postpone it, it's a $50 charge. The second thing, I just felt not very happy with myself that I wasn't capable of digesting all of the material and approaching the exam despite having things going on in my life. And I want to say to you, it's completely fine. Don't be like me. Don't shame yourself. Don't feel poor about having to postpone it. You are the only person who knows when you're ready for the exam. You need to trust yourself, know with your own intuition and in your own gut, and know whether or not you need to postpone your exam. Be honest with yourself about it. There's no shame in postponing it. I'd rather you spend $50 to postpone it than waste, what is it, like almost $700 for the exam by taking the exam when you're not ready for it just because you feel pressured to do so. So if that happens where you feel like you're not progressing and learning the material as you should be, just be honest with yourself and know that it's okay. Like your mental health and you passing the exam is much more important than what anyone else thinks about you. One of the biggest tips that I can tell you that I learned while taking my CISSP a year ago is don't compare your path to acquiring the certification to anyone else. Don't compare to me. Don't compare to the people on Reddit or Twitter or anywhere that people are discussing the CCSP exam. You're going to overwhelm yourself. You're going to negatively impact your mindset on approaching the exam. And overall, comparing yourself just does absolutely nothing. There is the Certification Station Discord server that actively has thousands of people engaging on how to pass ISC squared exams, as well as other cybersecurity exams. And I utilized this heavily during my CISSP. But one of the things that I found myself negatively doing was going through Reddit or the certification Discord server and reading about how people failed the exam. And I would get really discouraged about the exam. I would think to myself, oh, hey, this person studied for 6 months and they failed the exam. I've only been studying for 2 weeks. How am I going to pass the exam? And that's just not a fair comparison. Everyone has a different background. Everyone has a different mindset. I approach questions in a specific way that you probably don't. And going on Reddit and reading about other people's failures is just not the way to do it. It's going to negatively impact your mindset and it doesn't contribute anything positive. So turn to people for guidance, for encouragement, for support throughout the exam. You absolutely should. Having a support system throughout this exam is so imperative to being successful. But don't get bogged down by other people's journeys. You need to stay focused in your own lane on how you're going to succeed and not how other people are. One of the biggest things that I found to be really helpful, and I probably keep saying that over and over, but honestly, all of these tips are so helpful to me, things that I learned. You probably end up in similar situations as I do, where you get down to 2 answers out of 4 multiple choice answers. And you're like, is it option A or is it option B? And what I found was every time I did this, statistically, like 80% of the time, my gut first reaction of the answer I chose was right. And what I mean by this is when you first read a question, there's going to be an answer that pops into your brain. Let's say that's option A. But then I start rereading and I get a little bit less confident in my answer. And I say, well, it could be B. And then you're kind of having this internal monologue fighting yourself of, is it answer A or is it answer B? What I did was every time I had a question like this on a practice exam, I would put a star next to the question so I knew that I was internally battling myself about it. And then I would go back at the end of it and I would look and see, was my initial assumption about the answer correct? Or should I have changed my mind and gone with the second answer? And when I added all of these starred questions up, it was some 80% of the time, statistically speaking, because I did the math on it, that when I chose my first answer, it was correct and I should not change my mind. So what I recommend doing is a similar process where when you have an initial answer in your head, but you feel compelled to change your answer, mark that down and learn whether or not your gut instinct is correct or not. That way, when you get to the exam and you're in that position and you think to yourself, man, is it the first answer I thought of or is it the second? Then you know, and you have more confidence based on the statistics you've drawn from taking all those practice exams of my first initial answer is 8 out of 10 times likely to be correct. And you're not wasting that time and worrying yourself and getting stressed during the exam time trying to think, well, should I change my answer or not? Having the knowledge of knowing that I was 80% correct when I chose my first answer as opposed to changing my answer made me so much more confident, saved me so much time on the exam. So learn how you do with that brain processing when you get down to 2 answers. Learn whether or not you should change your answer or if you're right majority of the time. So if you're like me, or if you're like a lot of people in the world, you might get a little bit of anxiety about exams, and that's completely normal. And I am one of those people, especially leading up to it, like the first week before the exam, I would get so anxious about the exam. I'm lucky enough that my employer paid for me to take the exam, but that's kind of like a dual-edged knife. Obviously, it's financially amazing to have an employer that cares enough to want to support your career and help you grow and pay for exams. But then I imagine for people who don't pass exams that their employer pays for, you could feel a lot of embarrassment or feeling guilty about spending money that you don't pass the exam. So I felt a lot of pressure. It was like, I'm newly working at this company. I want to pass the exam. I want to perform well. And that's a lot of pressure on someone. It's an expensive exam. You don't want to waste the $700 that your company paid for you to take it. So that gave me anxiety. I had anxiety about not passing. I have like 50,000 people who follow me between Twitter and YouTube. And I thought to myself, if I don't pass this exam, then 50,000 people are going to look at me and be like, well, you clearly don't know what you're doing. So why should we trust you or follow you? So that added more anxiety and pressure to it. That said, one thing that really helps me personally to reduce that anxiety and nervousness around the exam was to prepare myself for the exam in a manner that eliminated a lot of the uncertainty. What I mean by that is know what lies ahead about your exam. So know how many questions you're going to be answering. Study the exam format, know what possible types of questions you could be asked, know how much time you have per question to answer, know about the, what is it called, the non-disclosure agreement that you have to sign within, I think it's 5 minutes and agree to it before you start your exam. Know the policies of the exam center you're going to. Do you need to wear a mask or not? Do they have lockers available where you can put your things into while you're taking the exam? Is the parking going to be close, or do you need to park far away and possibly take some other form of transportation to get there? How far away is the exam center? Is there typically really bad traffic during the time you're going to be traveling to take your exam? I would personally go visit your exam center if you've never been there before ahead of time so you know what the travel looks like getting there around the same time you'll be traveling on exam day. Anything that you can do to reduce your anxiety and nervousness around the uncertainty of taking the exam is going to make you feel more confident and eliminate a lot of that questions and stress in your mind when exam day comes. So that's what I did. I called actually the Pearson View Center a couple weeks before the exam And I was like, hey, what are the policies? Do I need to wear a mask? Do I need to bring XYZ? What, confirm that you have the right IDs laid out. You need to bring, I think it's 2 forms of IDs. So just do all that ahead of time. You don't want to be doing it last minute and stress yourself out unnecessarily. Oh, I've talked a lot. So one thing I personally struggled with, especially during the CISSP, was being honest with myself about material that I just was not well educated on or comfortable with. People tend to stick with studying information that they're already really good in. And that makes sense. When you're comfortable with the topic, you gravitate more towards it because you know about it, right? The thing is, these exams, they don't care if you're not good at a topic. If you're terrible at networking, like I was, I had no hands-on experience with networking when I took my CISSP, you're gonna get hit with networking questions. They don't care what you're good at and what you're not good at. They want to discern if you have the appropriate mindset, level of knowledge, and capacity to earn the certification, and they're gonna throw whatever questions they have at you. So the best thing to do is to be honest with yourself. Like I mentioned, I was really bad at networking when I was taking my CISSP, so I tended to avoid the topic of networking. I didn't want to study it because it was really difficult for me. It took a lot of brain power, and I was also kind of upset that I wasn't good at networking. But the reality is, the things that you are most afraid of are the things that you need to tackle the most in order to be successful in your exam. If you're really good at incident response, like I am, I didn't need to study incident response in the cloud nearly as much as I needed to study some of the more GRC governance something and compliance, regulations and compliance. I don't remember what the R stands for. But my point is, identify your weak areas, be honest with yourself about them, and tackle the areas that you struggle with the most, whether it's making flashcards about them or explaining the difficult concepts to someone who does not work in cybersecurity. You just need to find a way to identify the weak areas, to tackle them, and to overcome them. Don't just focus on the things you're already good at, because that's not going to behoove you come exam day. Do not force yourself to study when you don't have the brain capacity to do it. There's going to come a point, and likely this is more relevant to me because I did not study for a very long period of time, but you're going to get to a point in your day where your brain is just maxed out on capacity. And you need to listen to yourself and be like, oh, Meg, you've studied for 8 hours today. It's time to simmer down and go watch Netflix or play with your puppy. Like, calm down. You can't cram everything into one day. It's just not possible, no matter how good of a procrastinator you are. Trust me, I'm an expert procrastinator, been there, done that. You couldn't be a better procrastinator than I am. So listen to yourself, listen to your body. If you're exhausted, if you've had a stressful day, if your kid's yelling at you from another room, if your wife's upset with you, whatever, go focus on that, take care of it. Don't try to split your attention between studying and something else going on in your life. When you're studying, be fully present for it, because it's going to get annoying. If you study, if you read an entire chapter, but your brain is only half focused on reading and half focused about whatever else is going on in your life, you're going to get to the end of that chapter and you're going to be upset with yourself and say, heck, I just read this entire chapter and spent an hour reading it, but I couldn't even tell you what I just read. So if you get to a point like that and you're studying, you just need to calm down, take a break, step away from the material, go do something else, and then come back to it when you're mentally ready for it. That kind of segues into a very important topic around exams that I want to touch, and that's mental health during certifications. Let me tell you right now, there's no certification, nor is there any benefit to any certification that is worth losing your mental health stability. If you're getting to a point in your studying journey where you're starting to see your mental health decline, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're so stressed that you can't focus on your job or your family or your friends, take a breath, stop, figure it out, find out why you're not able to kind of stabilize yourself. What's going on in your life? Why are you so stressed? If you're trying to kind of dual split everything, I understand most people have jobs, lives, and families. It's not so easy to dedicate 24/7 attention to an exam. You shouldn't be. Don't expect that of yourself. Set realistic expectations and be okay if you fail yourself. That's completely normal in life. One day of failure doesn't erase 100 days of doing great. If you've studied 3 days out of the week and then you neglect to study for one day, it is what it is. You're human. Focus on your mental health, your success, your family, and your friends first before anything else certification wise. And the last pro tip I want to give you is to diversify your study methods. What I mean by that is don't just use this one book for studying. That's not going to bode well for you come exam day. I used a compilation of relying on my CISSP experience, reading 2 different books, taking 2 different books, practice exams, talking with a bunch of my colleagues who have passed the exam, discussing the more difficult topics that I struggled with on the certification station Discord server, talking about the topics I struggled with family and friends, and explaining it to them so that teaching is the highest level of knowing something, right? That's when you can kind of understand that you really know something, is when you can teach a concept to someone else who doesn't have knowledge about it. So diversify the resources you're utilizing to pass your exam. Don't just rely on one thing. That won't lead to success in this exam. I hope you found this to be really helpful. The CCSP exam is definitely a difficult one. It's honestly the most difficult exam I've ever taken in my entire life, and I never plan to take it again. You better believe I'm going to be getting all those CPEs every year so I can stay safe and never not be in compliance with having the certification, but it's doable. At the end of the day, it's a completely doable exam. You just need to be honest with yourself about how well you know the material, how you're performing on studying the material. I wish you the best of luck in taking your exam. You're going to do fantastic. When you pass it, feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message on Twitter or tweet me or comment down below, whatever you want. You're going to do amazing. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of the year and a lovely new year, and we'll chat soon. Bye.